My name is Linda Shopes. You know, I could tell a lot of stories, but when the question was posed to me, one immediately comes to mind. I served as OHA president in 1997 into 1998, and this was when presidents were also in charge of annual meetings. So our annual meeting in 1998 was at in Buffalo, New York. I decided as president that we needed to put aside some real money to plan the meeting, and that part of this planning included a trip to Buffalo several months before the annual meeting to scope out the local scene, to see what kind of local connections you know what I'm going to talk about, Cliff, to see if we could, to scope out local connections and see how we might integrate the meeting with local initiatives in the Buffalo area. So our local contact there, of course, was Michael Frisch, who has long been involved with oral history, and with whom I've long had a good collegial relationship. I appointed Cliff Kuhn and the late Deborah Bernhardt. One of the sadnesses for all of us is her untimely death, of course. She was at NYU, as program co-chairs. And Mike had a troika of local arrangements. Himself, a woman named Virginia Bartos, who was at the Buffalo and Erie County Historical Society, and I believe what had been a student of Mike's, I wasn't sure of his current position, but a fellow named Mike Nyman. And we did several things to, we had a meeting with representatives of the local community. We met with the hotel to arrange various venues for alternative kinds of program events. And, I felt we were being, pretty innovative within the constraints of a conference. But the thing that I remember the most, that I think both speaks to the deep, collegial and personal and political relationships that we all, or political sensibility that we all shared, and I think still in many ways continue to share in the Oral History Association, was this remarkable tour of Buffalo that Michael Nyman had put together for us. Partly to orient us to the city, and partly, I think, to suggest tours that we might develop. He took us to the waterside docks, which were, had been on Lake Erie, which had been a port, a major port city, and now were deteriorating. He took us to the amazing train station in Buffalo that sat on a hill in Buffalo, New York, that was a wreck. It was it was now a wreck, but it was a remarkable 19th century train station where thousands of immigrants had poured into the city to work in the steel mills and related industries. And to see this hulking reminder of a city that was once an immigrant entrepot was remarkable. He took us to Niagara Falls. I'm not nature girl. I'm not, nature schmature. I'm not real big on nature. I was astonished at seeing the falls. I was, we all grew up with shredded wheat and, Niagara Falls, a picture on shredded wheat. And I was just blown away at the scope of Niagara Falls. And I mean, somewhere in my personal archive, I have pictures of us at Niagara Falls, and just the pleasure we were taking in each other's company, the openness of Mike Nyman to take us around. And, he was a remarkable character. He took us to his home, which was actually an apartment in what had been an old immigrant boarding house. And, it was like a throwback to 1960s communes, the building and the conglomeration of characters that were living in this apartment. He took us to dinner at a restaurant, somewhere in the outskirts of Buffalo that had been an old immigrant a working class restaurant that some younger people were coming in to modernize a bit. That was, a nice example of the way community was maintained, even though it was changing. So, I just remember planning for that meeting with a great deal of joy and a great deal of pleasure. The meeting itself was, on one level, one disaster after another, all of which were, they were minor and they were all resolved. Our executive secretary at the time, Rebecca Sharpless, who usually handled the logistics of the meeting, was unfortunately unable to come at the last minute because her husband had just had emergency surgery, so she couldn't come. So there I was, sort of forced to deal with these various logistical issues that I wasn't fully apprised of. But, everybody pulled together, and I think it was a pretty successful meeting in a city that I would not have considered, a destination, but was, we went to City Hall, the City Hall in that town, which, it was built when Buffalo was trying to become the, capital, the entree to the West. The decorative arts and the architecture of that building and some of the other buildings in the city, which had, again, I'm not a building person, but the city was too poor to tear down. It just, it had no vision of how these buildings could be utilized for commerce and tourism at the time, and so had not been torn down. And there they were, these, Louis Sullivan building, who's the famous architect? Yeah, Frank Lloyd Wright buildings. They were all there, in really, I thought, very good condition. So it was a very happy, joyful experience, I think, for me, planning that meeting, and really solidified the kind of camaraderie I felt and continue to feel with my oral history colleagues. Okay? Are we done? It's a good Buffalo story, don't you think, Cliff?